So this morning we'll be discussing cancer and chronic respiratory diseases. So the first slides I'll be discussing about cancer. Then in the last slides I will discuss chronic respiratory diseases, not in detail, but just giving you, just some oversight, just some sensitization in terms of the existence of some of these conditions. Then I'll end by discussing, I'll end by giving you a bit of, some prevention strategies, which are really key when you're looking into chronic respiratory diseases. So in terms of cancer, what is the meaning of the word cancer? So cancer, it comes from the word crab. I hope you know crab, gakanji, and it's crab. So I think I think if you know the structure, a crab or gakanji, it has these a lot of these legs and it. So I think the reason why cancer came from the word crab or that same meaning, it is because of its ability to penetrate and or enter or into other cells, surrounding cells. So I think that's where the crab word comes from. The other word which is used for cancer is neoplasia, and that's another word which is used for cancer. And neoplasia, it just means new growth. Some of the people who started really looking into cancer very early were people like Rupert Willis around the 1950s, and they really were involved in coming up in the naming of some of these, in the naming of cancer. So what is, just from a definition, cancer is a non-communicable disease. It cannot be spread from one person to another. It is a disorder of growth at cellular level. So what do you have here with the rebellious cells? Your cells, they are growing abnormally. And so, yeah, so remember, the way our cells multiply, there are mechanisms within our body which really controls, which really controls the way our cells grow. But in terms of cancer now, we have got now a disorder where our cells, they grow abnormally, the system which really regulates the whole process of, in terms of growth and death is really impaired. So you end up having overgrowth. So I think from the way the rebellious, it's really something which is happening against, the body's mechanisms. Then the other, in terms of some of these cancer cells, the ability to invade and metastasize, which means they can actually invade other cells. I think I gave you the example of the word the crab, and using those can actually enter into other cells. And it depends, in terms of the metastasis, it can be distant or it can be local, where some cells can actually migrate from, from the area where the cancer is growing to even distant areas within the body. So in terms of epidemiology of cancer, like any other disease, we also have really, very serious issues, very serious people, people really looking into the epidemiology of cancer. And some of the reason why you have got people who are really dedicated into studying cancer is one, really, to try to see what are the factors which are affecting cancer, to also really look into the trends and causes. Then I think it's really all to try to identify and develop improved treatments, and also to try and find the cause of cancer. Within our setting, we don't have like really well-structured systems actually, which are really looking into cancer epidemiology. To try to really answer some of these issues. But if you go to most of the developed worlds, they've got dedicated cancer centers or cancer units actually, where you've got actually researchers just really looking into cancer. In our setting, yes, we have a few people into cancer, oncologists, radiotherapists, who are really, yeah. but it's not really well organized. Yes, we have our cancer registry, which is there, but in terms of really understanding some of these issues, we don't have. So I think someone mentioned the issue of, the only way you can have strong systems, in terms of some of these areas is to actually develop, the same way people have developed registers for the HIV program. The same actually can actually help if you are to really strengthen some of these programs. Then in terms of cancer epidemiology, there are terms which you need to understand. I hope you have heard this term, the lead time bias and length time bias. So I will not go into detail with these terms, but I think from the explanation it's very clear. Lead time bias. It means that early diagnosis may artificially inflate the survival statistics of a cancer without really improving the natural history of the disease. I hope you have heard this concept of survival bias. It's also another bias which is very common, among cancer. So these bias, they then actually affect in terms of your numbers, your statistics, your measures of frequency as you try to really, if you don't really address some of this. Then you've got your length time bias, which means slower growing, more indolent tumors. Tumor is another word for cancer, are more likely to be diagnosed by screening tests, but improvements in diagnosis might not translate into better patient outcomes. Then we've got overdiagnosis, which can happen. So there's tendons of screening tests to diagnose disease that might not actually impact the patient's longevity. E.g. for prostate cancer, one of the ways which we use to diagnose prostate cancer is through a prostatic specific antigen testing. So I think these are some of the words actually which we need to, maybe you'll be doing a research in cancer. You just need to understand your data or your whatever might be affected by this issue of either overdiagnosis, either lead time bias or length bias. So as you do your study, as you collect your data, make sure you are ready to answer some of these questions, because they might influence they might influence your results. So as I mentioned, in terms of now to really get data for cancer, in terms of the statistics, most countries, including ours, we have got some systems which are in place to try and really collect the information. So these are available at international level, at regional level. There's a question, I see a chat. Sorry, I need to go to my chat. What's happening? You can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, no, that's fine. I need to see. Someone is. I can't. I want to see your who. I saw some chat. Is it a question? You can unmute yourself, and unfortunately, I can't. I'm trying to go to the chat, but I can't. I don't know what's happening. Was it a question?
Yes, there's a question from T. Mashamba.
Yes.
Which says, can keloids develop into cancer? Is there a link between keloids and tumors?
Keloids, yes, thank you for that question. Keloids, they are not like really, what can I say? The keloids, usually they develop in case of injury, and you can have like excess growth and excess growth of tissue and on the area which was injured. One of the commonest areas where you can have keloids is on the ears, in the ears, maybe during ear ear piercing. You can have an abnormal growth of skin there. Then they end up being keloids. I don't think yes, some of the keloids might develop, but the risk is very low. From what I remember from my teaching early on, the risk of keloids developing into cancer is very low. So I'm not sure if there's anyone with an experience, but from my experience, from our teaching long back, we used to be told that the risk of developing. But the danger with keloids, most of them, if you try, I think there are people who are prone to developing keloids. So in most of this, in such patients, if you try and remove the keloids and you don't do it properly, it will always recur and resurfaces. But the link of that keloid with a cancer, there's very minimal, association, and actually rarely do they develop into cancer. So as I was saying, in terms of really getting these statistics for cancer, countries and even countries they've got systems actually which they use to. You have a comment, Dr. Chuguru?
No, I don't have any comments.
Okay, no, thank you. So in terms of systems to try to look into cancer, as I mentioned, most countries, they've got registries. And for Zimbabwe, we have what we call the Zimbabwe National Cancer Registry. That's where information about cancer is collected. But there are also international and other systems, at international level, which are actually used to track information about on cancer. So I know we have our local cancer registry. We have had in the past students within the MPH group who have also really taken effort to try and analyze that data. So I hope you know among your topics you guys are supposed to do, you have a topic on data analysis. So it would be a nice thing to really explore some of the data from some of these registries, just to see the trends in terms of cancers, in terms of male, female, whatever, all those issues, to try to see if there's been a change. Because I think most of the analysis were done a bit long back, but we have data within those registries which you can actually analyze for your field work. So I'll not go in detail in some of these things, but I think it's also for you, I hope you've done your epidemiology in terms of some of the studies which can be used to study cancer. You can use your observational studies, your cohort studies, your case control studies, your cross-sectional studies, depending, it's whatever you're looking at. And this can actually give you associations, between the risk factors and outcomes for disease. Then you can use your randomized control trials. Usually, these ones, they are used mainly, when you're testing therapies which are used for treatment of cancer. So I think just a background for you to understand, to say, as you do your cancer studies, some of these it then depends which study and which you can use, and it also depends with your outcome, what exactly do you want to assess. Having given you that background, we now come to a bit of epidemiology of cancer effects in Zimbabwe. These are the numbers. A year we have around 5,000 new cancer cases per year. And out of those 5,000 new cancer cases, we have around 1,500 deaths a year which are due to cancer. Then most of the cancers, maybe there's a change now, but early on, most of the cancers which we had in our setting, they were HIV related because of the HIV burden. But one of the worrying issue is what most of our patients with cancer, they present with advanced disease. So in most cases, I think people, they tend to, I remember when I used to work within the health system, in the gynae ward. So when you see someone presenting with cervical cancer, the vagina is already full of cancer, it's already, yeah. But for me, you then wonder, what really, delay in terms of really, coming to seek treatment. So I think it has to do with the awareness, or maybe, I don't know, maybe some cultural issues or some of these issues. Yeah. Maybe to hear from you, why do you think our patients, they present very early, they present with advanced disease? What are some of the reasons? You saw, yeah. I think I gave an example of cervical cancer. Someone will come with the vagina already full with cancer, but you wonder where they were before. Yes, Linda, you can unmute yourself. Then after that, Rotendo, you can go ahead also.
Thank you very much, Say. I think it's quite multifactored. There is definitely the issue of awareness that you've raised, but I think even the cost of accessing care here in Zimbabwe, our primary health care is not free or affordable as it is in some countries. So this makes it very difficult, because when people get sick when they're at home, they're like, otherwise it might just be a self-limiting condition where after a few days it goes away. And then in the issue specifically looking at cervical cancer, I think there is just a general sensitivity where diseases of the reproductive system are contained. So I would suppose that maybe someone may have noted what's happening, but for one reason or the other, they're just a little bit, they're shying away from actually visiting a doctor containing that, because of the intrusiveness of having to be treated for reproductive system diseases. That would be my assumption where that is contained.
Yes, thank you for that. We have Rutendo. Can you unmute yourself? Then after that, Kudzai.
Morning, Doc. Thank you very much. So I was going to, I think some of the reasons why patients present late could really be things to do with the facilities as well. Sometimes if you present to a facility and you have a nasty experience in the facility, regardless of the reason why you are there, if you then start thinking about, I need to go back there to get tested or screened for a particular disease, you may not want to go back to the same facility. Also noting that in the recent years, there's been a lot of health worker apathy. So when you come to a facility, even if it's just for a routine checkup or for your routine medications, you are going to spend a lot of time in that facility only to get a prescription, and you may not be able to get your medicines in the facility. So this also creates a bit of apathy among our clients or the patients, whereby they feel like going to a health facility is a waste of time because they're going to spend the whole day there, and maybe some other activities they won't be able to partake in other activities, agricultural, maybe farming if they are in the rural areas, because they've spent the whole day in a health facility. As well as our health facilities are now being forced to charge sometimes ridiculous amounts of money for services which are supposed to be free, because government is not remitting funds for those services for facilities to continue offering them free of charge. So there are sundries that are needed. Let's say for testing of cervical cancer, you're going to, or screening rather, for VIAC, you're going to need the cotton wool, the speculums, the autoclave machine is going to need servicing. So if the government is not remitting funds to facilities, they end up charging people to access those services. And some of these charges are way beyond reach of our population. Thank you.
Thank you for that detailed explanation and for acknowledging that us as healthcare workers, actually, we are also really contributing in some of these issues. Could I?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to say, first of all, I think it's issues to do with awareness, one. Patients will not be aware that maybe this condition is going to progress, it's a cancer. Then the second thing is cost of seeking healthcare. So nowadays you find people are now resorting to other alternatives that promise better rewards for less, for example, herbs and things like stem cell therapy that are being advertised, especially on many social media platforms. So people will then try to get access to those first because of the promise that you get better and their testimonies. When they now realize that the disease has now progressed and these things, they are not working, that is when maybe they'll decide to come to the hospital, but already it will be too late.
Yes, thank you for raising that issue. The issue of herbs, it's very common among our people, especially women. People, this issue of having, to try to please men. They then put funny things in their vaginas, and in the process, they end up then, getting cancer. Then Chikanda.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. So most of the things have already been said. So it's an issue of beliefs, what people believe in, and from my experience, people have a fear of what the process is that how cancer is treated at our health facilities, like the radiotherapy. People might have had a relative who once had cancer and then went for that radiation therapy and chemotherapy, their hair fell off and other things. If we have this, we will try to find alternative means of treatment. Going to the health facility, it's like a death sentence. So we need to work on people's fears and allay them with as to how the cancer treatment process, in fact, it's not treatable, but how it's managed, the palliative care and so on, and that maybe radiotherapy and maybe sometimes having to be amputated and so forth. So I think that one, and of course those people who aggressively market questionable products like what Takarinda has mentioned, as well as awareness. I think those are our major challenges, to the effect that when people realize that these things are not working, the cancer would have advanced from maybe stage 1 to stage 3 or even another stage where you can't reverse or undo the damage.
Yes, thank you for raising that, issues to do with treatment where people then get scared, because of the experience of relatives. I hope you know most of some of these cancer treatment, you can have maybe, the change in skin color, you lose hair and all those other things. So because of that fear and the experience from other members of the society or relatives, people then end up scared. Then memory, you can unmute yourself and give your
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doc. I think most have been said by my colleagues, but I only have a few additions where the reason could be why people are delaying coming to health facilities, why people are coming late. It might not be they are delaying, but sometimes it's because of where these services for cancer screening are. I think if we were to decentralize cancer screening services to the primary health care centers, then that would be better so that people could access them even from within the rural areas. It's now when we now have VIAC services, you'll find VIAC, it's mostly at district hospitals. And when they're going out for the small clinics, it will be mostly outreach services. So people like, for example, mothers who come for postnatal care, they might need to have VIAC services done, but they are not available in the primary health care facility. So there's need to decentralize so that people access those services earlier and not present with cancer in an advanced state. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The issue of decentralization, I think, is something which we really need to focus on, you know, as a country. I know, I'm not sure how far the first lady, the Angel of Hope, I have seen them really moving now down to communities where they are actually screening women for cervical cancer. We need more such initiatives. Then lastly, Ashen, before we proceed, Ashen, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Doc. For mine is a short edition on the issue of belief. I think now many people are now putting their beliefs mainly to the prophets. So they believe they put their trust and belief in the prophet. So by the time they come to the health facilities, it will be now not their decision, the one who will be affected, but it will be relatives' decision, because they will be seeing that there will be no change. So the disease will be at a later stage. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for really mentioning that. You know, this gospel of prosperity, our spiritual fathers, and what, yes, they are doing good in our spiritual lives, but at times they are also really, you know, affecting our health-seeking behavior, where people then tend to rely on them, you know, every advice and every guidance. Yeah, so I think it's something which really, so I think all these issues which you have mentioned, it's all about really raising awareness and within our community, you know, as part of primary prevention. Then there's a question in the chat box from Joanna. Is there a difference between factors associated? So I think factors associated is more of like and factors affecting cancer. So there might be no difference, but for me, the way I see it, factors affecting, I think it might be like, you know, the risk factors which we are looking at. But if you are say affecting, now it might be, you know, the outcomes now at which you are looking. So you might be looking at different angles with what are some of the things which actually predisposes to cancer. Then you now have the cancer. What are the things then which can then affect you know, the outcome of the outcome of the cancer? So it's yeah. So you are looking before and after to see the progression of the disease. So then I think we discussed in terms of most of our patients, they present with advanced disease, and usually we don't have data in terms of survival, but most of our patients within our setting, you know, they die when they develop cancer because of some of the issues which you mentioned, but mainly because they present with advanced disease, and really there's nothing which you can do much with advanced disease. So these are the statistics in terms of in 2018, in terms of the new cases. If you look in terms of the new cases, in 2018, there were 17,465 cases. But out of those cases, you will see your cervical cancer among women topping the list, followed by breast cancer. Then you have your Kaposi sarcoma. This is an HIV-related cancer. You have your prostate cancer, and you have your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Then other cancers, they constitute less than half. So these are like the top, you know, the top cancers in both sexes. If you are looking at in 2018, Then if you look, if you look in you are now comparing between males and females. So in terms of the number one cancer in males, you have your prostate really topping the list, 20%. You have your followed by your Kaposi sarcoma, then your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You also have a bit of esophagus and esophageal cancer, the esophagus. Then you've got your colorectal cancer. This is your cancer of colon. The one, I think it has been famous of late because of, Patson Zamara and one of these actors, I forgot his name. I think he also passed due to this colorectal cancer. And there's a lot of talk about colorectal cancer, colon cancer in terms of, the risk factors, people talking of poisoning, blah, 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 But generally, if you check in statistics globally, there's been usually an increase of this colon cancer among young males. That guy from whatever who died, that actor is not from Zimbabwe. So this whole theory of being poisoned, what, it might be true, but yeah. But if you check articles, you really see some of these numbers really going up. You can read through to see the factors. So if you go to your females, you have your cervical cancer topping the list, and you have your breast cancer. So if you see in women, your cervical cancer and your breast cancer, they take the huge chunk, almost close to 50% of these cancers is just due to breast and cervical cancer. Then you also have your non-Hodgkin's, your Kaposi sarcoma, and the esophageal cancer, all the other cancers constantly. So yeah, so I think this is the typical pattern. So why is it important to really understand this distribution? It is important so that you really know where to focus, that is, where to focus your resources now to say, in terms of focusing your screening interventions, your prevention activities, and your awareness, which means you really need to really focus, in terms of the prostate, and then in terms of the cervical cancer. Maybe just to ask from you, this for the top cancers, maybe for prostate, can someone tell us what are the signs and symptoms of prostate cancer? It's part of awareness so that people know that if they're experiencing this, then this is prostate. What are the signs of prostate cancer? What are the signs and symptoms of prostate cancer? No one? Yes, Nyasha? Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, so in elderly male patients, they usually present with lower urinary tract symptoms. So they have problems when they go to the bathroom. Passing urine can be a problem. They will have problem initiating urine. The stream will be poor, and they will have a feeling of incomplete empty. Sometimes they will also have nocturia, waking up at night a lot of times to pass urine. They may have back pain, and they may have loss of weight and loss of appetite if it is progressive. So these symptoms are non-specific to prostate cancer. They can be from benign prostatic hypertrophy. So a biopsy will be necessary to see this case.
Yes, thank you for that. Then in terms of, we discussed males and females, then in terms of children, this is data from 2010. These are like the commonest cancers in children. You have your leukemia, your retinoblastoma is for the eyes, for the eyes. You also have your Kaposi sarcoma, Wilms tumor is for the kidneys, where you can have a mass within the kidney, then in the eyes, and then you can have a growth within the eye. Then you have also these other cancers which are happening. But if you look, I think there might be even a change now. But according to 2010, these were the statistics where the leukemias were topping your list. followed by your retinoblastoma. But if you look in the others, in girls, it's not like the same now. And if you look the pattern in girls, your leukemia is down here, but for boys it's up. But we have your Wilms tumor, which is topping the list, followed by retinoblastoma. So it's not like really, yeah, it's not the same in terms of the pattern of these cancers, in children as you compare males and females. So I think it is critical for you to understand that difference between your overall incidence of cancers. If you then look between males and females, if you also then look between girls and boys, so there's that difference in terms of in terms of the incidence in the numbers. Nyasha, is that a question, or we forget to lower your hand?
I think I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Then, in terms of the risk factors, for cancers, we have some non-risk factors, which are really based on some of the studies which have been done long back. And usually, we got these risk factors from some of the studies, observational studies, which were done long back, which have shown, the association between some of these factors with cancer. I hope you all know there's a risk of lung cancer and tobacco, the risk of asbestos with lung cancer. Then those working in the leather industry, there's also an increased risk of them developing nasal cancer. Then the issues of dyes, dyes and bladder cancer, then radiation and many other cancers. Your diethyl still whatever, I forgot the name of that drug, which has been associated with a vaginal adenocarcinoma, then Epstein-Barr virus and your Bechte's lymphoma, then your HPV, human papillomavirus, and cervical cancer. So I think these are like really known, some of the risk factors based on some of the studies which have been done. But generally, these are some of the risk factors for developing cancer. You have smoking, which is a risk factor for developing lung cancer, mouth and throat cancer. You have got your alcohol, which is associated with increase of oral cancer, esophageal cancer, breast cancer, among other cancers. Then you have got, a diet which is low in fruits and vegetables can also lead to cancer. Your physical inactivity has been shown to increase other cancers. Your obesity, I think we've been discussing this yesterday. Your obesity, as a risk factor for many other cancers, which includes colon cancer, breast, endometrial. Then you also have your human papillomavirus, which is sexually transmitted, which increases the risk of having cervical cancer and some forms of anal cancer. So there are a lot of these risk factors. We also have, issues to do with the environment and lifestyle, which increases the risk of developing cancer. Your use of hormones, your hormone replacement therapy. This one for menopause, and when women reach menopause, we can give them, some of the hormones to replace your estrogen and whatever. Then, because of those hormones, they can increase the risk of developing cervical breast cancer. Then you have got your UV light, very common among the albinos. I hope you have heard. You see them really in the streets trying to look for money to buy some of the creams. Why? Because some of those creams, they actually prevent developing of cancer. Then there are also other certain occupations and chemicals which predispose. So there are a lot of these really risk factors, and they depend. They are not like really specific to a cancer, but they vary between cancer and cancer. We also mentioned the issue of HIV-related cancers. These are some of the HIV-related cancers. You have your Kaposi sarcoma. I will show you pictures of this. And some of these HIV-related cancers, there are some viruses which are, and there are some viruses which are also really act as risk factors. For your Kaposi sarcoma, you have got a humus herpes virus, which increases the risk of developing this cancer in HIV positive. You have your cervical cancer is here. I think there is this. You can have cervical cancer, but once you are HIV, you are HIV negative. So as not everyone who develops cervical cancer, they are HIV positive. But there's an association. There's an increased risk of developing cervical. And if you compare those who are negative and those who are positive, there's an increased risk of having cervical cancer in those who are HIV positive. And now it has been, I think, proven now to say the human papillomavirus is one of the virus actually which acts as a risk factor. There are a lot of these viruses, and they vary, but I think it's the 16 and 18 ones. I think they range from, I don't know up to how many names of the numbers. But HPV, I think 16 and 18, they're the ones which have been actually now proven to be associated with cervical cancer. Then you have your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, your ocular squamous cell neoplasia. This one is for the eyes. I think some of you have seen people, who are HIV positive. They have got growth in the eye. At the end of the day, you can actually, most of them, the eyeball can be removed because of some of these cancers. So these are very common. These are HIV-related cancers. So in terms of the trends of our HIV-related cancers, and if you see, this was a study which was done, I think, by Dr. Nyakapao, the oncologist. She did MPH. So she did one of these trend analysis as part of a data analysis, just to look in the trends of some of these HIV-related cancers between 1997 and 2006 in Harare. So you can see the usual trends of what we were discussing last time. You have your Kaposi sarcoma, which was very high, around 97, blah, blah. Then around 203, 204, there was a sharp decline. And this sharp decline was mainly due to the introduction of antiretroviral therapy. But for these other cancers, your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, your eye cancer, it seems actually they didn't have really much change in terms of the coming in of hearts. Yes, there's a drop, but it's not very significant. So the message here from these two, this one is for what cervical cancer and Kaposi sarcoma in the eye. But for this one is the reverse actually. Around 2004, 2005, there's an increase, and there's an increase in terms of the number of cervical cancers which are being detected. And for me, I think if you extend this graph even up to 2020, you might see actually an increase in the number of cervical cancer cases which are being detected among HIV. Can someone try to explain why it's something which might support my hypothesis? Rutendo, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
All right, thank you, Doc. I'm just going to, not a wild guess, but since 1997 up to date, the screening of cervical cancer has been well advocated for. And as we discussed earlier, there's been an attempted decentralization. That would probably mean that making diagnosis of cervical cancers or catching cervical cancer has increased since 1997 and has continued to increase because of the increased screening strategies. I think that may explain why there is an apparent increase in the number of.
So yes, that's very correct. I hope some of you, I think you've seen a lot of these partners, the ITEC, the OFID, Capnec, all these paper partners, they are now recruiting like, tens of, in terms of nurses to try to really work in their cervical cancer program. So because of that, there is now more surveillance. There is more surveillance. So because of increased surveillance, the cases are actually increasing. Not, for me, I don't think the disease actually is increasing, but because now there is more surveillance, because we expect the antiretroviral therapy to reduce, the cases for some of these cancers. But because of the improved surveillance systems, data collection systems, and all those things, it then appears as if we have got more cases, but actually it might be due to the improved surveillance. So in terms of treatment of cervical cancer, the treatment of cervical cancer, and usually it depends with the stage of the cancer. So if someone with cancer presents to a facility, there is a way of staging, and usually someone comes, the condition. So you then need to really assess, their stage. Are they in stage 1? Are they in stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4? Then the treatment modality would then depend with the stage of the cancer. The stage also determines the survival. I think I explained that we discussed that in the first slides, where we say most of our patients, they then present at advanced stage. Then there's this concept where people think cancer cannot be cured. Cancer can be cured. It's not like HIV. And that depends with the stage when the patient presents. If someone presents with a cancer very early stage 1, it hasn't spread to other organs, that cancer can actually be treated. So I think that there's this notion where people think cancer cannot be treated, cannot be cured. Cancer can be cured. It depends the stage of presentation. If you present early, your cancer is still localized. So I think we need to spread that message, among our communities, because people, they really think if you've got cancer, that's a death sentence. No, that's a death sentence, but that's not the case here. Some of the cancers, they can be treated depending on the stage of presentation. So we have got our radiotherapy, and we can have external radiotherapy where people go in this machine, then then we can have a brachytherapy, and these are like internal now as opposed to external, where you get some of the ionizing radiation which is inserted inside mainly for cervical cancer to try and burn the cancer. Then we can have chemotherapy, which is given. It depends with the type of cancer, where you can be given chemotherapy, or you can get some of these medications which you take. So they actually, then there's something which is missing here, which I didn't put, which is not there. There's also the surgical component, and some of the cancers, they can be removed, by surgery, where people actually can have an operation. You excise the region with the cancer. So it's your radiotherapy, which can be internal or external. You have your chemotherapy, and you have your surgical. Those are like really the three modalities which are used for treatment of cancer. But in terms of the outcomes of treatment of cancer, they tend to differ country by country. So in terms of what causes this difference, some of the things include difference in age distribution, other conditions which exist with those setting, issues to do with lifestyle, issues to do with wealth, and all those issues. availability of medical care, the environment, the culture, and the genetic makeup. So the mortality of cancer, and if you check, it tends to really vary by country, and the variation is mainly due to some of these issues. And if you come to Zimbabwe, in terms of prognosis, there was a study which was done around 295, 97. Our problem is we lack recent data in terms of cancer. There are 284 patients, 42%, they got 3-year survival, which means actually the other half, they died before, they died within the 3-year period. So there's really high mortality. And what are the challenges for this poor prognosis? Is due to advanced disease, where people present with cancer in more than stage 3. I think we discussed this. We also have other issues within our setting, which then really make the situation worse. Our HIV, our malnutrition, and our younger age, issues to do with resources, equipment, drugs, and healthcare worker, we have got these perennial strikes which happens among our healthcare workers, which then really make the situation worse. And on top of all these issues, we've got inadequate infrastructure, funding, research, very little research happening within the cancer setting, and the research is not coordinated. The cancer control services, if you also try to look into it, they are not really, well coordinated. But now I think here, we always have a challenge in terms of some of these issues. I'm not sure, this might be outdated in terms of, I didn't adjust that, but now there was a control strategy which was like in draft, but I think now it is now available in its full form. Then issues to do with management guidelines, there are also serious issues there. Then our referral system, that's a serious challenge. I have seen, people, they go out there, they are doing cervical cancer, you go to a village, then you find someone who is HIV and someone who has got advanced cervical cancer as part of your routine screening. Then some of those patients now end up having challenges now in terms of their management, because they then need to be seen by a gynecologist, they need proper surgery. So some of those systems, they are not actually in place, which then becomes a challenge. Then issues to do with the documentation. I think we discussed this a lot, but our documentation is always a challenge for most of the programs. And we hope you guys, you really take part in improving this. Our M&E systems are not okay. Diagnostic equipment, we've discussed these issues to do with community awareness on cancer issues is also a challenge. Then I'll briefly discuss the organization of cancer care in Zimbabwe. We have got your Ministry of Health, NCD unit. Then we've got your NCD unit where cancer issues are housed. And we have our health system, which is not here on this slide, where you have got your primary health facilities, your secondary, your tertiary, your whatever, up to quaternary, all those issues, all those levels. So at all those levels, there are things which are happening in terms of really preventing, in terms of cancer management. We have your screening really happening, at various levels. And management is also really happening at those levels. Then on top of that, there are various, your cancer association, which also really advocates for some of these issues to do with cancer. And most patients with cancer, they end up, having chronic damage or impairment in terms of their mobility and everything. So because of that, we talk of issues of palliative care. We are supposed to have a lecture on palliative care. Unfortunately, I sent an email to these organizations. None of them responded, but if they respond, we will discuss and they will give you, their experience in terms of palliative care. So that's long-term That's like the long-term care, for patients with chronic disease. And there's been debate in terms of when to start palliative care. Do you start palliative care when someone is about to die, or you start palliative care as soon as, just after diagnosis? So all those issues, I think you can read around them, or if you're lucky, we can have the people from these associations presenting to us some of those issues. You also have your UN agencies and NGOs really participating in cancer, your World Health Organization, and some of these other organizations. And we have got your Radiation Protective Authority of Zimbabwe. Why, can someone mention, why do you think the Radiation Protective Authority of Zimbabwe is a key stakeholder in cancer? Why is the Radiation Authority of Zimbabwe a key stakeholder in cancer? Yes, Laura? Yes, Rutendo.
I think it's because many cancers can be caused by radiation, and we know that radiation is used in many activities, mining, in the health sector, and so on and so forth. So they are stakeholders because they are the ones that monitor for proper use of radiation. And yeah, I think I don't.
Yes, and that's part of the answer. But you mentioned it. You said they are the ones who monitor the use of radiation. Most of the cancers they are treated. In terms of cancer treatment, we discussed the issue of radiation. With really most of the, in terms of your brachytherapy, your radiotherapy, all those issues, they involve the use of radiation. So the radiation authority actually they come into play. Why? Because they need to really to safeguard how those things are used, and they are used in cancer treatment. Also looking in their disposal now. If those things are being disposed, correctly and properly. So that's why the radiotherapy, that's why your Radiation Protection Authority of Zimbabwe becomes important, mainly to provide guidance on the use of the radiation which is used for treatment of cancer. Then we have your National Prevention and Control Cancer Strategies, which was really developed by a collaboration between various stakeholders. And these are some of the stakeholders who are involved in coming up with that strategy. And then in terms of cancer prevention, these are some of the things which can be put in place to prevent cancer. It has to be it needs multiple stakeholders. Remember, we discussed issues to do with tobacco and alcohol as risk factors. So also really control on some of those issues, having, laws to look into those issues is also part of the control. Your vaccination, mainly against hepatitis B virus for your liver cancer, and your HPV for cervical cancer. Then control for schistosomiasis. Remember, schistosomiasis is a risk factor for developing bladder cancer. So really having programs around there, it also minimizes the risk of developing bladder cancer. Then your control, your HIV. Remember, we mentioned that most of our cancers within our setting, they are linked to HIV. So if you really put a strong system to control HIV and all those other STIs, actually it will reduce your cancer. Then your screening is also very important, and in terms of screening, which some of the cancers which can be detected early by screening. You have your cervical cancer. Now we have got your VIAG, which is now very popular, which is being used to. And now most provinces and districts, they are now really started just doing VIAG. Then you've got your breast cancer screening. For your breast, how do you screen for breast cancer? What are the modalities of screening breast cancer? you want to implement a program to screen breast cancer, what are how is it screened? How do you screen for breast cancer? No one. So yes, God will.
Thank you very much, sir. So for breast cancer, we have specific markers that we use to screen for breast cancer. For example, we have should be CA1. I can't remember the actual cancer marker, but we can collect a blood sample and we run in the lab for the if they are elevated, shows that it might be breast cancer. So there are some of the tumor markers that are used to screen for breast cancer.
Yes, we can do our genetic and it is screening, but just remember those things are very expensive. Yes, they are there. What other modalities which can be used? Moyo.
Okay, thank you very much. On top of what Godo said, I think we can also encourage clients, both males and females, to do self-examination of their breasts. If they then encounter any lumps or any unusual developments on their breast, they can then visit their health facilities.
Yes, and thank you. And that's one of the really, the primary thing we need to be recommended in terms of self-breast examination. Then yes, and one thing you mentioned, which is key, breast cancer, it occurs both in males and females. So it's critical to make sure that our males, we also really find time to palpate and check if we are not developing any lumps. Rutendo.
I think in addition to what Chebukani has highlighted, the physical examination, there are other investigations. So we can do an ultrasound scan of the breasts in both males and females, or a mammogram, mainly in females over the age of 30. And then if the lumps are suspicious, we can go on to do a biopsy. If it's visible on the surface of the breast, we can do an excision biopsy or an incision biopsy or a fine needle aspirate, depending on the suspicion of what type of breast cancer it may be.
Yes, Sandeji. So yeah, so I will not really go in detail, but what I want you to do, as your homework, I want you to look for the common cancers, and which we discussed. Say in females, we have our breast cancer, we have our cervical cancer. What are the screening? What are the screening methods which are used for that? I think that's a good exam question which we can bring out, so that you understand. Then to our male counterparts, we have your prostate cancer. And how do you screen for prostate cancer? I think I gave a hint before in terms of where we discussed about overdiagnosis, which was prostatic specific antigen. Yes, but do we have other ways which are used to screen for prostate cancer? Other ways which are, yes, Sebukani.
Okay, I think we can also do digital rectal examinations.
Good. Then what else can we do? Rutendo.
You can also take a biopsy and do histology.
Yes, and then you can also use your ultrasound scan. So yeah, so it's an interesting topic to start actually. I know we have got people, in this class we've got biostatisticians. There's a lot of interesting statistics which you can do around issues to do with screening. It's an interesting subject. I hope you have done your screening, in terms of there's high level statistics which you can actually do, very interesting statistics. in terms of screening, screening methods and how, to then assess, in terms of their yield, their specificity, their whatever, all those issues to do with screening test and diagnostic part and diagnostic test. Then I think we have discussed this in terms of challenges which we have in treatment and diagnosis. I will not repeat these things again. Then this one, I will not really go in detail with this. I will try and get a the recent version of the. Can I ask someone? Dr. Vojora. Dr. Vojora, are you there?
Yes, Doc.
Yes. Can you look for cancer strategy? I know.
Yes, I'm there.
Yes. Can you look for the recent version of the cancer strategy and share with others? I know where you're supposed to be. Yes.
I'll do that.
Can you get it, then share with, I've been trying to get it without success. Maybe you can be successful in getting it. So
I hope I will be successful.
So can you get that and share with your colleagues? So we have the cancer strategy, which was developed some time. I have a version of it, but in terms of its structure and of that version of structure, that was the vision to have a cancer-free Zimbabwe. Then that was the mission, the overall goal. And then there are specific, specific program areas in terms of areas to focus on. Area 1, detection, diagnosis, palliative care, surveillance, and research. So please, when you get this document, I'll not go in detail because I'm not sure if it still has these same components. But if you get it, try to really understand, the current focus in terms of our focus within the country. So follow up with Dr. Vojora so that you might be able to get it. So I'll briefly go over some of these cancers, just in brief here. Because your breast cancer is it affects the breast. It occurs in women, but it also occurs in men. Then in terms of the incidence, you've got 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. These are the risk factors, for breast cancer: your alcohol consumption, your early menopause, your late menopause, your post-menopausal obesity, the use of oral contraception and your hormone replacement therapy. Those can really increase the risk of developing breast cancer. Then, in terms of breast cancer, there's actually a relationship between the exposure to estrogen. Some of the things which increase estrogen exposure, your early menopause, and your early menarche. If you start for your periods early, and your late menopause, it means you've got a prolonged period during which you are exposed to estrogen. So because of that, there's an increased risk of developing breast cancer. Then your nulliparous, if you don't have children, and I think there is some statement which say, breastfeeding, it helps to also really, to reduce, the suckling can also help to really reduce some of these hormones. Then some of the things which actually decrease exposure to estrogen include your physical activity, your lactation, and having children. So for breast cancer, these are risk factors and protective factors which I have listed. Then for your lung cancer, it is the leading cause of death globally. It affects both women and men. There are too many types. There are several types here of this lung cancer. You can read about it. And your prostate cancer, as I mentioned, is very common. I hope you know where the prostate is. And some of the risk factors include age, race, obesity, and weight gain. Then your colorectal cancer is, which you've been mentioning, we gave an egg here. It's a very commonest type globally. It affects the, for intestines, small intestines and large intestines. So our large intestines, that's where you have your colon and your rectum, and which are then at risk of developing colorectal cancer. What are some of the risk factors? Aging, but now we are seeing people younger age developing cancer. Black race, unhealthy diet, low exercise, diabetes, and a family history. There are also genes which can be tested the same way we test for genes for breast cancer, your BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, all those genes. So the same, there are also really some of these tests which can be done to really see if someone's at risk of developing cancer. So this is the end of our presentation on cancer. I took these slides from Dr. Nyakabao, one of the oncologists, so I acknowledge. But I think from what we were discussing, it was just, there are more issues to do with, there are a lot of issues around cancer. What we covered are just a few of those issues. There are a few pictures just to see how some of this cancer, some of these conditions, this breast cancer can actually be, and this is, yeah. So these things can be serious and can be worse. This is a case of Kaposi sarcoma. So this is some of the melanomas among your, in the albinos. Then this is your Kaposi sarcoma. We used to be, like a hardwood and those nodules, and very common among our HIV patients. But with the coming in of heart, I think we have less of those. Then this is your breast cancer, it can be, some of these things can be serious. And you can also have children having cancers, and it can be very, it can be severe. Otherwise, this is the end of the first presentation. I don't know, do you have any questions on this one before we proceed? Yes, we have Latricia.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Makurimidze, for the presentation. I have a question on diet as a risk factor, because often we hear people saying diet is a risk factor for a lot of these cancers. So I just wanted to find out, because I saw on one of the slides, I think for, I'm forgetting which cancer it was, you were saying a risk factor is a diet that's low in vegetables and fruits. What about all these other potential carcinogens that are, some additives that are being spoken about? And I remember there was once a debate on whether GMOs actually could contribute to the risk of having these cancers. So I just wanted to know what you think about the matter, and is it being downplayed or is it being overplayed?
Yeah, in terms of my opinion, thank you for that question. I think it's true, to say diet actually can be really a risk factor. I think you mentioned the word carcinogenic, where some of the additives actually, they predispose, in terms of, remember, the whole process of cancer, as I mentioned, it's about, your cells, they start multiplying and it's uncontrollably. So you can have, things within, within the diet actually really initiating that process. And your additives, you also have your, your fast food, this issue of, the radiation, all those things, the free radiation, the ions really kick-starting this process where cells can really start, to multiply. You have your diet leading to obesity, which is also a risk factor for some. So I think it's a genuine, to me, it's something true, which we really need to, to focus on. If you don't then focus on it, I think, it's something serious, which you really need to take seriously, because there's now evidence which really points towards diet contributing to development of cancers. Yes.
Okay, and how about genetically modified organisms?
I'm not very sure of the mechanism, but I think it's the same mechanism. But I think they should cause it. But in terms of how this really predisposes to cancer, the mechanism actually, I'm not sure. But I believe they should be able to really cause. But for me to then explain they cause cancer this way, this way, this way, I might not. I'm not sure of the mechanism. But I think there is some association between genetically modified food and breast cancer.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
Any questions? So one of the things which I realized we didn't really also put in our schedule. I think there's this what can I say? There's this mistake here which people are kind of doing when they think of NCDs. Yes, Chikanda?
Oh, yes, I have a question, Doc. Thank you so much for the presentation. We always encourage breastfeeding as one of the key preventive measures with regards to breast cancer. So I was wondering what the mechanism is really. Have there been studies to say it's actually the breastfeeding milk is coming out, or sometimes like when adults are having foreplay and there is sucking of breast, etc. It has been mentioned casually that it also does reduce risk of breast cancer. Have there been any studies to really prove that?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think I mentioned the issue of breast we mentioned the issue of breastfeeding here. But I think one of the mechanisms which is thought with breastfeeding actually and it decrease the risk of developing cancer is due to the decrease in estrogen exposure. So there's I think there's some evidence to show that actually, by breastfeeding, it helps actually to reduce the levels of estrogen. But I'm not sure now the mechanism. How does the levels of estrogen are reduced? Are they in the milk, or is it has to do with the hormone secretion? Maybe I think so. Maybe it has to do with the hormone secretion. And if you look your cycle, but if you are breastfeeding, you are producing your prolactin, all those hormones, which then maybe stop, production of these ovulation hormones, the estrogen and blah, blah, blah. So because of that, I think that's where the mechanism is, but I'm not sure. I might need to really check. So it has to do with the breastfeeding is linked to decreasing estrogen, because estrogen is the one which is then associated with the development of breast cancer. I hope you are answered.
Thank you. I'm answered. Thank you.
Okay. So remember, I was just saying I wanted to start the talk on respiratory diseases. But I think there's this mistake actually, which we kind of really tend to make. To just think, if we're talking of NCDs, we tend to think of NCDs as your hypertension, and your hypertension, your diabetes, now your cancer, but actually the NCDs, there are more actual issues, there are more conditions which follow under the NCD banner. We have got your respiratory conditions and which really follow that. You also have your mental health. Your mental health actually follows under NCDs. But I think most of the focus has been on the the mainstream NCDs. But we have other we have got actually a lot of array of some of these NCDs. This morning I shared with you a link for a recent talk which was given by WHO in terms of NCDs. Please, can you take your time to listen to that talk, because it actually tried to really have this wider view in terms of NCDs, in terms of the risk factors and where we need to kind of focus. So I think that lesson, if our colleague from who fails to come, I think that should be enough actually to really give you the information regarding trends of NCD. So I'll briefly discuss some of the respiratory diseases. So what are these respiratory diseases which are classified as NCD? These are a group of chronic diseases affecting the airways and other structures of the lung. What are the major risk factors for these diseases? We have your tobacco, smoke, and other forms of indoor air pollution, your allergens, your household chemicals, and outdoor pollution. So I will just give a few. So in terms of the risk factors, as I mentioned from the prior slide, you have your cigarette smoking, and it is one of the risk factors. You have your occupational dust and chemicals. You are going to do the module on occupational health, where you're going to discuss these issues in detail. You have got your environmental tobacco smoke, within the setting. For non-smokers, as opposed to people who smoke, there's also that exposure, which can actually increase the risk of getting some of this disease. That's why if you go to the Western world, the issue of smoking in public places, at airports, in trams, whatever, it's a very serious issue. Why? Because of those risk factors. You have your indoor and outdoor air pollution, as I mentioned, also acting as risk factors. Then you have your genes, your infections, socioeconomic status, your aging population, all those issues actually really predisposing to development of some of these conditions. So one of the commonest of these conditions, we have what you call your chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I will not really go in detail in terms of describing in terms of the pathophysiology of these diseases, but just understanding we have got that condition in terms of the challenge. So there's the obstructive, which means there are changes within the lung which prevents proper lung airflow, and there are two main conditions which follow under COPD. We have your chronic bronchitis and your emphysema. And they are also really very common among smokers. Then this is your chronic bronchitis, where you've got excessive production and chronic inflammation in the airways. Then, the walls of the bronchi. The bronchi, remember, you have got your trachea, then your trachea, it splits into bronchi, then your bronchi splits into bronchioles, then at the end of the bronchioles, you then have your air sac, where gases exchange okay. So in this chronic bronchitis, you have thickening of the walls and of the bronchi. Then you have got your cilia. Remember, you have got cilia, which are small hairs, which helps in the movement of mucus to clear the airways. So these cilia, they are damaged. Then the clearance of microorganisms and mucus is also reduced, which leads to increased risk of respiratory infections. In most cases, these patients, they present with productive cough, always sputum, and they can have shortness of breath, which lasts for months. But it's very common among people who have this history of smoking. Then your emphysema now, your bronchitis, you're affecting the bronchi, but your emphysema, remember I mentioned the structure to say you have got your trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, air sac. Your emphysema now is damaged to the air sac, the terminal end of this whole system, where then you can have these alveoli are distracted, which then affects gaseous exchange. Then you also have asthma. I'm not going in detail about asthma, but asthma is treated as an NCD. And for asthma, as opposed to the other one now, is a reversible obstruction of lung disease. Usually, you have got constriction of your airways, your bronchospasm and your bronchoconstriction due to inflammation or irritants. And most people with asthma, they present with wheezing. So I think I won't go in detail in terms of these respiratory, NCDs, but just understand that our NCDs, they go beyond, the usual NCDs. Then my last slide for today, I just wanted to discuss. There are some of the issues actually regarding this whole issue to do with NCDs. We have what we call, like key strategies, and which, if you really focus, as a country or globally, they will really go a long way, in trying to, in preventing most of these NCDs. So the 5 key strategies, which this one can come as an example. But you are looking at the NCD as a whole. You are really asked to come up with, some of the key issues to focus on. So some of those key issues we need to focus on. Remember, most of these NCDs, we've been talking about tobacco and smoking as really risk factors. So really putting in place mechanisms actually to try and address issues to do with tobacco and smoking. We are supposed to have a lecture where we're going to discuss tobacco and smoking, but remember, but because of time, and it's difficult to get people to give the lecture, we will not have. We will try and share with you maybe lectures from the previous year, so that we can actually really try to appreciate some of the laws or some of the things which are put in place within our setting to control tobacco. Maybe to hear from you, from your experience, what are some of the local initiatives which are being implemented within our setting to really try and address the tobacco and smoking? What are some of the things? Because remember, as I said, it's just like really looking at the key things now. And the key aspects for NCDs, which, you want to really target high impact things. What are the things you target? So tobacco is one of them. So I'm asking, in our setting, what are some of the things which are being done to try and address? Anyone to comment issues to do with tobacco and smoking control? What is being done in our setting? Any legislation which within our setting? So I think you see it in the exam. Maybe you try and answer it in the exam. Anyone?
Yes, can I try?
Yes, good.
I'm not quite sure if there's any legislation that has been put in place to control this, but then I've seen that whenever companies are advertising maybe their tobacco products, I've seen sort of like a statement that goes, smoking may be hazardous to health. I think it's trying to sort of like make the public aware that in as much as we are offering this product, there are also consequences to it. And then I don't know if it's now applicable in the local setting, but then I think South Africa is done that step to say tobacco products, they're a bit, I think there's a tax that is attached to it that makes it not so cheap to buy tobacco products. But then I'm not quite sure if it's in place in Zimbabwe. But then the one that I mentioned to say whenever they're advertising their products, there's that statement that goes, smoking may be harmful to you, may be hazardous to health.
Yes, thank you for that contribution. I think you've heard about the syntax. I think some of those, what you're trying to mention is the syntax to try to prohibit and use some of that text to try and address, health issues. Moyo, then and Chikanda. Moyo, can you start?
Okay, thank you very much. If you look at the hospitality industry, for example, in hotels, there are areas where they've allocated for smokers to say if you are booking into a hotel and you're a smoker, you are then booked in a certain area where smoking is allowed, and so that you then are not booked in areas where other people who have been booked are non-smokers. So there are also other areas where you also get signposts written no smoking to try and also reduce exposing those that don't smoke.
Yes, Chikanda. Chikanda, can you unmute yourself and give your contribution?
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. So Chebukani has mentioned it, the demarcation of smoking and non-smoking zones in public places. I think that's how the government has been implementing this. It's not really enforced per se, but I've noticed that in public transport, like in buses and in some combis, there are no smoking signs. But the issue of enforcement, however, is what's lacking. So somebody might actually board a combi and start smoking, but the public they are not aware of their rights to be able to say you are not supposed to be doing this, and it's our right to breathe clean air and stuff. So I think there more needs to be done in terms of awareness with regards to the effects of passive smoking. Otherwise, it's really hard to be implemented.
Yes, thank you for that. But I think, and for me, I think it's just, I think in terms of our systems, we used to have very good systems within our setting where we had, systems to try to control some. I remember, in the Zupco buses, of long back, these signs of no smoking, blah, 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 were there. But I think things just changed, and we are now going on the negative side, everything. Some of these control things which we used to have, we no longer have them. Linda, yes, can you give your comments?
Thank you very much, Say. So I'm not sure if some of these are applicable here in our context, or maybe it's an issue of enforcement. But the issue of regulated or limited advertising, where unlike other products, where companies or retailers and manufacturers have got limited airspace on radios and televisions to advertise their products. I know in some countries where tobacco is concerned, they've actually limited to say maybe for a tobacco product, we can only have one advert a day or one advert in 2 days. Then there's also the issue of age restrictions. So most tobacco products, I think they're prohibited for people under 16 or 18. Again, I know this is not really the case in Zimbabwe in terms of enforcement, but in terms of the consumer education, it's actually there on the tobacco products where it says if you're under this age, you cannot smoke. And I think in some ways that helps to decrease the smoking prevalence.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, thank you for that contribution. So I think try to really understand and some of these issues, some of these key strategies. I think if you on the WHO agenda, they are like really on the top. So let's try to bring these things closer home and see what exactly are we doing within our setting to try to also help in these strategies. In terms of alcohol consumption, I'm not sure. I think it's more or less the same with tobacco. But I hope we have, in terms of the sale of alcohol, how do you open a beer hall, how do you open there are a lot of other, there are really, restrictions and things which are really in place to try and minimize. Anyone with something about alcohol consumption which they want to bring to light, which is which we have as a country, as a try to minimize consumption of alcohol. Anyone with an example? I saw people are celebrating now because the lockdown has removed restriction on alcohol sales. So yeah, people have been suffering for a long time. So I'm not sure, yeah. But I think it's more or less the same. But if you look, I will try and look for the documents or the structural instruments around alcohol. But there are a lot of these things in terms of operating hours, in terms of bottle stores, nightclubs, all those issues. But the challenge, as I said, everything in our country seems to be just going on the negative, negative side, where enforcement on some of those issues in terms of, hours to operate and who should buy, their serious challenges. Then health eating, we discussed this during our malnutrition talk. Also try to bring this closer home in terms of what we are implementing and whatever control measures we have to try to make sure our population has access to good we are promoting health eating. Then air pollution, we don't really talk much of air pollution within our setting, but I think it's something which we really need to really start considering, because it's also a risk factor for these NCDs. I'm not sure if you've got anything which we are implementing within our setting. Then our promotion of physical activity, we had very good systems actually in terms of promoting physical activity. Unfortunately, we are reversing the gains. We are just reversing all those gains. People, all those issues. I haven't seen any open space. You were planning to build hotels in whatever, all those issues. So yeah, for me, we are more of like really reversing some of the progress which we had, which we had made earlier on. So I'm not sure. I think yeah. So try to really understand this package actually and bring it closer home to say, what are we doing in line with the World Health Organization in terms of their focus with us as a country? What are we really doing in targeting, in trying to promote these things? Because remember, this is like the primary prevention, and if you implement it, it will really go a long way in controlling most of the NCDs, because these risk factors, if they are not controlled, they lead to so many of these. So I think that's the end of our presentation today, where we discussed the cancer, where I briefly discussed the issue of respiratory conditions. Then I ended with some of the control strategies, which I think they are overarching, which we need to kind of reflect and see where are we as a country in terms of having those controls. So I will take questions before we call it a day. Where I have Linda, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Say. I just wanted to make a comment to say, I think from everything that you have taught us, and in particular your final remarks where you're talking about some of the reversals that are happening in the country, I think it then brings to the forefront the issue of having a truly public health system. What I mean by this is you find out that in our health system, our human resources for health are largely health personnel. But in other countries, within their ministries of health, they have got engineers, they have got people whose primary background is probably just nothing particularly related to health. And where we have these people, not only as people we collaborate with or partner with on certain projects, but as people who are actually part of structures that are within the health system, it becomes easy, because an engineer would definitely be able to say, no, we are creating this space as a green space where people are just supposed to come and exercise. Similarly, the same applies with even non-health government departments, like the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Finance, for example. We need to also have health people there so that the full integration and full partnership is realized, and enforcement and even policy and programming can be truly, you know, a public health approach.
Yes, Andrew. Thank you for really raising that important point. I hope when you did your module and in I think it's public health philosophy, where we discuss about the primary health care. I'm not sure if Dr. Maradzika was still around. I think there's this issue of where we are really going back to the medical model of care. We are no longer really implementing public health, but actually now try to medicalize everything. We are shifting away from the original principles of primary health care, where issues to do, you know, with primary prevention, communities, whatever that issue. And as you correctly said, some of these things, actually, they are, you know, I think there's this mistake, mainly among doctors, and where we think, you know, this whole medical profession is about doctors. Is about what? Is about doctors. So we think everything has to be medical. And for us to then really, you know, try to open our, you know, our view and see the importance of, as you mentioned, engineers, and you know, engineers, even other cadres within the district. I've seen districts where they the doctor just thinks it's all about medicine, but the health promotion, the lab, the pharmacy, whatever, all these other issues, they are kind of seen as secondary, you know, secondary healthcare workers. Yeah. So for me, I totally agree with you. But we are reversing the gains. I'm not sure which year. I completely agree with you. We just need to have a change, you know, in mindset, where we really take public health, you know, as not as a medical aspect, but where there is integration and collaboration of various issues. In other countries, actually, as you also highlighted, they have actually a separate Ministry of Public Health, a separate public health ministry which looks into public health. Then you have got your Ministry of Health, whatever, which looks into these whole issues. So I think at some point we will realize this and take corrective action. I am not sure the recently new structure of the Ministry of Health, which was announced by the new minister, if you address some of those issues. Yeah, it's complex. But for me, generally, I also feel that us as public health practitioners, we are also to blame. Because if you check, you know, in terms of the leadership, you go to most of these ministries, you go to districts, you go to provinces, you go to what we have got public health practitioners who are trained, you know, as part of this course, and they are the ones who are leading this, and they are overseeing this whole change and this whole shift. So who do you blame? To me, yeah, I think we should also need to take the blame and actually take corrective action as public health practitioners as we go forward, you know. Who do we have to blame actually? Tisu tukutonga ma district, tisu tukutonga ma province, tisu tukutonga and all these places. But look what we are doing. Is it because, yeah, I don't know. It's a long topic. Let me cut the whole story short. Otherwise, but I think it's good to, you know, to have time to reflect so that some of those issues we also think about them, because in the next 2 or whatever 2, 3 years, you'll be the ones leading those things. You'll be, some of you are DMOs already, some of you will be head office, and you continue promoting some of these, some of these things. So I don't know, but I believe us as public health, we are also to blame in this, because we are, instead of promoting the correct things, we end up doing the season. Any other comments before we close? So it seems there is no other comments.